give me your best, 2-minute summary. Why do you want to serve on the Ohio Supreme Court?
I think the Ohio Supreme Court can benefit from my broad-based and in-depth trial court experience. Right now on that court, there are a couple of justices who certainly have trial court experience, and without demeaning them in any way, it's in the distant past. I, on the other hand, over the past 14 or so years, up until literally this week when I had a jury come in on Monday, have tried over 200 jury trials in both criminal and civil cases. I have decided many, many, many criminal sentences where there have been guilty pleas or guilty findings. I have decided many motions in civil cases that may or may not, depending on the ruling, dispose of a lawsuit. I have deep familiarity with the rules of procedure and of evidence. One of the important functions of the Supreme Court, which is not necessarily its most high-profile function, is to interpret and apply the rules of evidence and procedure for the lower courts and to harmonize them where there are disagreements across the districts about how to interpret and apply those rules. So I think this perspective will be valuable in the deliberation room. It's a perspective that my opponent here does not share.
How do you view a seat on the Supreme Court different from what you're doing right now, or what you have done?
Well, the most obvious difference is you're one of 7 instead of the only person deciding a case. The second, I would say, obvious difference is that you are instructing the lower courts on what the law is and what the law is going to be in future. So it's the task is a little bit less direct, a little bit less hands-on, for want of a better term, and a little bit more collaborative. If you have a viewpoint that you think is the correct one, you need to find at least 3 others who share that viewpoint to have your viewpoint prevail.
I think I've asked you this last time, but
Well, then
you ran in the primary.
Same.
You ran in the primary as a Democrat.
Right.
Do you think the general election ballot should have political labels or affiliations on judicial races?
I will tell you that I don't have an opinion on that matter. If I did have an opinion, it would probably, to be honest with you, be influenced by whether I thought it helped or would help or would hurt me in any given case. So as a candidate, I'm not a good person to proffer an opinion. I think that I understand the differing viewpoints on that.
Mm-hmm.
The most I can say is this: I value the independence of the judiciary, and I think it is important to make it clear that the judiciary is and remains independent of the political branches. That would militate in favor of not having partisan affiliation on the ballot. But by the same token, I recognize that, particularly with the United States Supreme Court, where more attention is paid, that the public seems to have the view that those appointed by Republicans will vote on the Republican, if you will, side of an issue in a heated political type of case. And people seem to think that those appointed by Democrats will do the same on their side. In other words, the battle to reassure the public that the courts remain independent might be lost already. And if that's the case, then there's probably no reason not to have partisan affiliation on the ballot. Having said that, I'm not offering an opinion that one or the other is better, but I recognize, I think, the 2 sides.
How does that, again, I know you're not affiliated running in the general, but how does that, being a Democrat on the primary, how does that affect what you bring to the court?
Well, I will say this. let me be clear, and this is what I say to Democratic audiences, is that don't expect me to be voting as a Democrat with a capital D on particular issues in particular cases. I need to be, and I believe I am, open-minded, and that I will go where the facts and the law lead, even if they lead somewhere where my Democratic supporters might not want to go. Having said that, a person is, it seems to me, a member of a political party for some reason. So I think it can give people a little bit of a clue about the way they view the world. For example, one thing that attracts me about the Democratic Party is its commitment to working people, its commitment to individual rights, its commitment to the rights of minorities, and by that I don't just mean racial or ethnic minorities, but the people who are outnumbered in any way. You might even say political minorities. These are things that attracted me to the Democratic Party once I became old enough to think about what party I wanted to be a member of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can be said, I suppose, that I have been a Democrat since birth through virtue of being born where I was and to whom I was. But you don't really think about these things, I don't believe, until you're a young adult. And I trust the same is true for those affiliated with the Republican Party, that they're more interested in protecting the rights of corporations and those who are already in power, preserving that power.
You hear a lot of criticism of particularly the U.S. Supreme Court making laws, you know. Can you explain maybe your judicial philosophy or where you stand on that kind of thing as far as the court's role in this greater governance issue? I mean, just in real simple layman's terms.
Right. Well, the court's role, as you and I both know from our grade school civics class, is to be a check and balance on the political branches of government. I have heard and seen my opponent in this race decrying what he refers to as judicial activism, what he refers to as legislating from the bench. The original judicial activist was Chief Justice John Marshall in 1803, when, in the case of Marbury versus Madison, the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated the Federal Judiciary Act of 1798. The particular law in question there is sort of forgotten, but the principle subsists to this day, and that is that it is the court's role, when the political branches overstep their bounds, to tell them that they've exceeded the Constitution, and where a particular law is involved, to invalidate that legislation. If we didn't have what the other side calls judicial activism, we would still have racially segregated schools and public accommodations. We would not have child labor laws, and 10-year-olds could be working 70 hours a week in a slaughterhouse. If we did not have so-called judicial activism, people would not be allowed to buy birth control, whether they were married or single, and on and on. I would also remark that if we did not have judicial activism, then corporate entities would not have the same exact free speech rights that you and I do. So it cuts both ways as well.
I'm not looking for an attack on your opponent.
Right.
But why would you be the better person for this job compared to him?
Because of the experience that I laid out before. He's never presided over a trial. He's never decided a case by himself. He's never sentenced a criminal defendant and had to come to sometimes these decisions can be wrenching, believe me. He's never had to tell a party to their face, you lost and the other side won, or vice versa. these are things that, first of all, will keep me understanding that any given case is extremely important to the litigants in it. And of course, from the Supreme Court perspective, it is important to those in the future who are going to be bound by or guided by the law that is enunciated. So I don't attack him. I think Judge Fisher is a person of good faith, but, and I say this without intending to slight him or anybody on the court, but his experience is redundant. It's already there. It's already represented by several members of the court. And while he's capable, it seems to me that if you have this diversity of experience and viewpoints, you're going to wind up producing better opinions that people will respect because they come from a broader perspective instead of just and I'm not trying to say that all the justices have the exact viewpoint, but my opponent shares much of the same background as several of the justices who are already there.
There's been a lot that's happened in Cleveland in the past 2 years. You're kind of at the epicenter of some of that stuff. How has that affected you as a judge?
Well, like any case, you learn. Like any case, it changes you a little bit or a lot. And I trust you're talking about the state of Ohio versus Michael Perillo. It has, of course, reinforced my awareness of the notion that cases are important to people. The ones that attract attention and the ones that don't. But I think the way that I conducted myself in that case and the way I decided the case should demonstrate that I'm unafraid to make a decision that I believe is right, even if it's not a decision that is necessarily politically expedient.
I realize you're limited in how you can respond about specific issues, but I'm going to ask everybody about the death penalty. I mean, as a judge statewide, how do you approach that? I mean, with the understanding that there is a Democrat on the Supreme Court who speaks his mind on these things. It did when he was running too. I mean, which is not what I'm saying anybody else should do. But how do you approach an issue like the death penalty?
Well, first of all, I will acknowledge this, that the state of the law as it exists now is that the death penalty per se is constitutional. I don't know what would change to change that, other than, candidly, the composition of the United States Supreme Court. But I think that the composition of that court would have to change drastically for the basic constitutionality of the death penalty to change. So having said that, I am bound by that. I will say there is a percolating issue in law about the constitutionality of the death penalty as administered. There is an argument that it is administered in violation of the guarantee of equal protection given by our Constitution. There is a trial court opinion to the effect that it does violate equal protection out of California. I have read that, although it's probably been a year since I read it. I assume, but don't know for sure, that is in probably, I can't remember, I think that was a state court, so it's probably in the appellate system in California. Either that case or that issue certainly could eventually work its way up to the United States Supreme Court. At the same time, there could be a similar case coming here. In that event, I need to be open to the evidence and the arguments. If the death penalty does violate equal protection as administered, a decision to that effect is going to rest heavily on whatever the evidence is in a given case. Because I don't think you can just say, in theory, it violates equal protection. You need to show that in fact and in practice it does. So all I can say on that is that I would be open to the possibility that it is unconstitutional as administered. At the same time, depending on what the evidence shows, it very well may be constitutional as administered and not just per se.
So, I mean, I'm not stretching your words here to say, I mean, you're open to, I'm assuming that issue and other issues like it, I mean, you're taking I'm open to looking at the evidence and whatever that's
Right,
there, as opposed
right.
to, and I'm speaking of one particular person in the Supreme Court who's pretty outspoken about,
Right.
I'm opposed to this, I'm opposed to this. You're not taking that
No, I'm
tack
not
into
taking
that. I've got to ask a political question. How do you think the presidential ticket's going to affect Ohio's Supreme Court races, particularly your race?
Well, before I answer that, I should tell you that I predicted to my wife in mid-2015 that Donald Trump would be out of the race before any vote was cast in Iowa or any caucus was had. In other words, my opinion my instinct is probably, well, in this year, not many people's instinct has been proved accurate. I think there are two possibilities. As background for this, I should tell you that I learned a big political lesson in 2014 that turnout really matters, that the strength at the top of the ticket really matters, that coattails really matter. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it. So now, in the presidential year, ordinarily, there is a pretty strong Democratic turnout. If that occurs this year, and if I do my work in educating Democratic voters about who well, I would say who the candidate is who emerged from the Democratic primary, then I should be in good shape and it should be favorable. On the other hand, as you are well aware, the Republican presidential candidate seems to be attracting a lot of typical Democratic voters. If that is true, and if those voters